Okay, welcome everybody. It's good to see you tonight for our third and final webinar of our Bishop's Climate Summit pre-webinar series. As we are waiting a few minutes for others to join us, I just want to let you know that this is our third webinar. Our first one, if you did not get a chance to see that, was Welcome to Our Warming World. What have we done? What can we do? Our second webinar was called Our Warming Oceans, Swimming in Dangerous Waters. And tonight we feature When is it too hot for humans? What are we doing to ourselves and our world? You'll be able to find recordings to all of these webinars on our conference website, and we're going to drop the link to our website, to our webinars page there in the chat for you. Those will remain on that website through the Bishop's Climate Summit, but can be useful for you if you'd like to use those webinars in a class at church. If your Creation Care Green Team would like to have a showing and discuss the material there in those webinars, you can do that. So we want to make that available to you to use as you see fit. Tonight, we are excited to welcome a new guest for the evening, and I'll introduce our speakers in just a moment. But as you're coming in, we'd like to know where you are from. So if you would, in the chat box, give us your name, your church name, and what city and state you're from. I know we have a couple of folks from out of state, so just let us know your name, what church you're here from, and where you are located. Throughout the webinar, if you would please add questions to the chat. We will not stop during the presentations, but at the end of our presentations, we'll be going back through the questions that you put in the chat and addressing as many of those as possible. It could be a long time tonight going through our presentations, but we want to make sure that if you can stay a little bit longer, we'll open up Q&A as long as we need to answer as many questions as possible. So we look forward to having you with us for that. And then I just want to mention that our Bishop's Climate Summit is the big event coming up on April 18th. We'll drop a link in the chat for you for that event as well. This event is only $25 a person, which includes the event, the speakers, the workshops, and lunch at Maple Springs United Methodist Church in Winston-Salem. And if you bring a group of 5 or more, the cost is reduced for your group. There's also a cost reduced for students. So if you bring some school-age students, college students, seminary students, it's only $10 for our students. We want to make it affordable for them to learn and to understand what's going on with the climate and with our ministry in the life of the church. And so on April 18th, we'll be able to welcome Bishop Ken Carter, who's going to be sharing with us from his perspective on this topic, as well as our keynote speaker, who is Reverend Dr. Melanie Harris. She's a professor of Black feminist thought and womanist theology, as well as the director of food, health, and ecological well-being at Wake Forest University and Divinity School. Her research and scholarship, she critically examines the intersections between race, religion, gender, and environmental ethics. She's the author of a lot of different scholarly articles and books, including one that I read in my schoolwork just a few years ago that really touched my understanding of what it means to do creation care and creation justice, a book called Eco-Womanism, Earth-Honoring Faiths. You're going to be blessed by Melanie Harris and her time with us on April 18th, and we hope that you can come and be there because you can choose. After lunch, we're going to have workshops. You can choose 2 of the 9 possible workshops that might best intersect with the work of your church and where your passion is. And each of these are going to be focusing on hope and possibilities for such a time as this. And we'll talk more about that as we go through the event on April 18th. But you're going to learn resources for you, for your church, for your ministry. And then beyond the summit, the Creation Care Ministry team of the Western North Carolina Conference is going to be offering additional summer and fall opportunities to help follow up with what we're learning and developing in the Bishop's Climate Summit. So I just want to say, get your team together and register for the Bishop's Climate Summit as soon as you can. And we look forward to seeing you on April 18th. So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing here and just welcome you to our event tonight. My name is Jonathan Brake. I'm the Western North Carolina Conference Eco Missions and Creation Care Coordinator for our conference. And I'm joined here with several members of your conference creation care team who have been working very hard to bring about these webinars for you, as well as the summit on April 18th. We'll come back to that and remind you about the event coming up soon. But tonight, we're excited to offer you two presentations. One is coming from Michelle Lewis, and we're going to drop the information in the chat about who Michelle is and give you some bio information there. And you'll learn more about her and really get to enjoy her presence with us as she shares tonight from an experience and an expertise around heat and what heat is doing to us, to our health, to our world, to the things that we don't think about, but it touches us all the time. I was thinking recently about the last time I had the flu and I had a fever. And my body temperature as a human being is typically at 98.7, but it was measuring a 2 to 2.5 degrees warmer than that. And I felt awful. Well, the reality is, since pre-industrial times, the earth has been warmed by human activity just about the same amount. So if you want to understand what's going on with the climate these days and why things seem a little bit weird and off and like we've never seen it before, and all of the things that we've been saying, such as today, where I woke up this morning and let my dogs out to a 65-degree warm morning, and by this evening we'll be below freezing. It's not like I'm accustomed to in March. And so we're living on a planet that, in essence, is running a fever, and heat is a big part of what we're dealing with. So I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Michelle Lewis, and she's going to share with us from her knowledge and expertise and work. And Michelle, I hope you'll share with us a little bit of the excitement of the work that you do and what it ties into our ministry and how we can learn from you to do what God needs for us to do in this creation that He created. So take it away, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Jonathan, for that introduction. But before I get started, I've got a PowerPoint for you and all of the data and the facts. But I thought I'd start with a short quiz. And just who can name a song that talks about extreme heat? Anybody? Do I see any hands? Chris, you're unmuted. Are you unmuted because you want to talk to us about a song about extreme heat?
I don't know what I'm doing with this on the computer. I'm
Oh my
messing around
goodness,
with.
Chris. Anybody?
There used to be a song called Steam Heat or something like that, but I can't remember. It was an old song. Um,
Oh, okay. Yeah. And we've got
but
one from Ashley Ward, Dr. Ashley Ward in the chat box. She said, Hot Time in the City. Anybody else? These don't have to be church songs, y'all, because otherwise you're just going to be singing about hell, right? Heat Wave. Yes, I was hoping somebody would say Heat Wave. There's one more that I'm thinking about. It's a hip hop and R&B song. You're probably not. Yes, Brian, thank you. Hot in here. Yeah, he says it's getting hot in here, so take off all your clothes. They're talking about a club. They're not talking about church, y'all. And then the backup singers say, I am getting so hot, I want to take my clothes off. But tonight, we're going to help y'all keep your clothes on. Amen. Because y'all are going to be in church and you're going to want to deal with respectability politics. So My name is Michelle Lewis, and I am a policy analyst with the Heat Policy Innovation Hub at Duke University's Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability. And I want to I'm so excited that I'm here for you all with this important conversation. And y'all, if you're not excited about the Bishops Climate Summit that's coming up, you should be. I spent today with Dr. Melanie Harris, leading a workshop here in Winston-Salem, and you're in for a treat. If you've never heard her speak before, you're definitely in for a treat in hearing her do that. And let's see, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. And so, what we're going to talk about tonight is I'll spend some time talking about heat risk and vulnerability and faith-based organizations as community anchors and developing community resilience hubs, and some things to consider as you're building partnerships to do this work in your own communities. And according to NASA, July 22nd, 2024 was the hottest day on record, and summer 2023 was the hottest in 2,000 years. And the EPA says heat is the leading cause of weather-related deaths, with over 14,000 deaths since 1979. And as temperatures rise, heat-related illnesses are increasing. And and the people being affected the most are vulnerable populations, including those in poor housing, agricultural workers, pregnant women, individuals with diabetes or heart disease, low-income populations, and those experiencing energy poverty. And while our faith communities are called to care for the most marginalized, many at-risk individuals remain overlooked in responses to extreme heat and energy poverty. And some poor outcomes are due to exposure, while others are due to altered capacity to thermoregulate due to comorbidities. And these may be pregnant people, the elderly, children, those taking certain pharmaceuticals, and those with specific comorbidities, for example, diabetes and heart disease. And also those struggling with substance use disorders and mental health disorders, and those persons experiencing homelessness are also at increased risk for heat-related illnesses. And when I was a United States Park Ranger, my last duty station was the Martin Luther King Jr. site in Atlanta. And the days that we had the most arrests and the most involuntary committals for people experiencing serious mental health episodes were those days with heat advisories. They were those really hot days where people didn't have anywhere cool to get inside. And I say that because your churches have the ability to really respond in unique ways with to extreme heat. And sometimes in ways that we're not thinking about. When I was doing that work, there was a church, it was a Catholic church, and they had a feeding program on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They fed not just the homeless, but anyone who needed a meal. And when they started that program, you could actually go inside the church and sit down and eat. You could go inside, sit down and eat. People served you, but as there was community outcry, people didn't want, homeless people coming through the community. So they were like, okay, well, how can we still have the program, but not keep people in the community, get people out as fast as possible? So they went from letting people eat inside, which for some people was the only respite they had from heat, in the middle of the day, in the heat of the day, to just like handing people a plate of food and pushing them out the door, right? And so to think about how are we as faith communities responding to the most marginalized in our communities, especially with extreme heat and extreme weather events. And so I was asked to talk a little bit also today about urban populations, knowing that some of you are all coming from urban populations, and there are some situations that contribute to heat in urban areas, and of them are the massive amounts of asphalt and concrete, tall buildings, decreasing or in some instances cutting off airflow entirely, and the heat emitting from devices such as cars and air conditioners. And next time you have the opportunity, I want to encourage you to just stand next to an air conditioner and feel the heat that's radiating from it. And then imagine the heat generated by millions of those in a city. And in our in our rural communities, our rural populations are disproportionately affected by extreme heat. And so many of the solutions have been focused on urban communities, but rural communities have high rates of chronic illness. And in many of our rural communities, lack of access to adequate health care. About 2 years ago, in the community where I live, we had a doctor leave because they couldn't find long-term housing. And they were a primary care doctor. And when this happened, hundreds of people in our community received letters telling them they would need to find health care elsewhere and possibly another county over. So these were senior citizens, they were people without transportation. And I can't imagine getting a letter. My father got one of those letters, but I didn't. But I can't imagine getting one of those letters that says, "Hey, you might need to drive 45 minutes or an hour and a half to find a primary care physician because we no longer have capacity or the ability to care for you in this community." There's also increased poverty in those communities and inadequate housing, increasing the risk of morbidity and mortality, with many of the people in these communities already experiencing poor health outcomes and lack of adequate access to health care. And they become particularly vulnerable to rising temperatures when this happens. So these health and socioeconomic disparities can make rural residents more vulnerable to extreme heat, particularly when living in poorly insulated mobile homes or struggling with energy poverty, where the poorest families spend 20% or more of their income just on energy costs. And I'm not saying any of this to negate the experiences of persons living in urban communities. Early in my research, when I was a graduate student, I worked with young people in New Haven. And I learned from a couple of families that in the summertime, they only ate microwaved food because they lived in a third floor walk up apartment without any air conditioning. And in the summer, it was just too hot to cook. And so, in addition to having these extreme daytime temperatures, they're dealing with extreme nighttime temperatures. They're also now, you put on top of the extreme heat, the lack of access to like fresh and healthy food and just eating microwaved food for extended stretches of time to the impacts that that has on health as well. And so when we think about this, we think about, the housing quality differences and indoor temperature regulation and extreme heat. Those, you know, we need the cool in the nighttime. It hasn't been cooling off at night the way it should because of extreme heat. But what happens, right, when we get out of the heat is our bodies have the opportunity to reset. Right, our bodies can reset, we can rejuvenate. I mean, anybody, if you've ever been outside on a hot day and then you've had to go inside to a hot house, maybe because your air conditioner was broken or because you couldn't run it, when you get up the next morning, if you slept in the heat, I don't know about you, but I just feel miserable, right? You feel like, and the longer that goes on, the less able to function you feel. And so thinking about ways that the church can step up, access to reliable transportation affects people's ability to reach cooling centers. And so some of you are already ensuring that people get to church on Sunday morning because you have transportation for your church, right? Can you ensure that people are accessing cooling centers, whether it's in your church or somewhere else in the community? As we continue thinking about heat and health and infrastructure, there are some of the health risks we've already talked about, but extreme heat does worsen cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. You've got aging electrical infrastructure, but also aging buildings that contribute to just extreme heat inside facilities and access to healthcare and water. And one of the things that was noted on the last slide was social isolation. And during the Chicago heat wave, more than 739 people died. And the number is likely higher because heat deaths are not often categorized appropriately and appropriately like recorded and reported. But many of the people died alone. And as the church, I think this should challenge us to consider what type of faith community we aspire to be. And if we truly are trying to be good neighbor, welcoming others, like, is that what we're trying to be? Or are we trying to be, I say, the neighbor that's screaming at the neighborhood kids to get off their yard, right? Because we can choose the type of neighbor that we want to be. And so as you're identifying the vulnerable groups within your communities and the groups that you want to reach out to, if you're not already doing that work, you want to think about the elderly, young, outdoor workers, people who may be facing who may be chronically ill or facing other types of illnesses. And you can look towards census data and health data to help you do that work. And some of the social determinants of risk are income, education, housing quality. All of these things impact how people will be affected by extreme heat in their communities. And, the thing that we're bringing as communities of faith is we're still trusted organizations in many communities, right? People still trust us to be the church and to live out the gospel. Whether we're doing it or not, people trust us to do it. And if people are showing up every week or to whatever the programming you're doing in your church and in your community, it's because people trust you. And so there is a social capital that we have as churches and as faith-based organizations, as key social anchors. I mean, some of your churches have been around for hundreds of years. If your church has been around for more than 10 years, raise your hand. More than 10 years, more than 20 years, more than 30 years, more than 50 years. More than 100 years, right? I could keep going because some of your churches have been around a really long time. And faith-based organizations are often still first responders in times of crisis and social service providers. So churches were the original social service agency. Before government stepped in, it was a church that communities relied on. We also have existing physical infrastructure. So, are you making the most use of your building? Are you just open on Sundays and then you're closed up the rest of the week? Right. So all of these are things that I hope you're thinking about. Most churches have a built-in volunteer network, even if it's only 4 or 5 people. In most churches, it's 10% of the people or 5% of people doing all the work, right? But there is a volunteer network that's built in. And we also have a unique administrative experience and outreach in our communities that we can leverage to do this work on extreme heat. And we are still these spaces of outreach and support. So we can, as we think about what are some of the things that we can do as churches, as faith-based organizations, we can provide education, social gatherings, fostering community awareness and connection, educating people about extreme heat and how they can respond. And also culturally sensitive messaging. I say we, meaning us at the Heat Policy Innovation Hub in Duke University, we don't want to assume we know what you need in your community. We believe that you're the experts in your communities. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen because there's a video that you all are going to, that I want you to take a look at about our Cooling Communities Network and the work that we're about to do. And then I'll reshare my screen to finish my slides.
Record-breaking flooding is developing across North Carolina. More than a foot of rain has fallen in some parts of our state.
During Matthew, the water became so high, the storm was so intense that we were actually cut off as a community. So we were all out going from home to home, sharing generators and trying to look after each other. We were ill prepared. That made us as a whole really decide that we needed to find a way that we could act rather than react.
The heat is a noticeable change in lifestyle now. People will use our facilities a whole lot more, especially for the seniors.
One of the challenges with extreme heat is it's not as dramatic as what we see with hurricanes or tornadoes. And so it quietly erodes our health, our economies, our infrastructure, our productivity.
The Community Lighthouse is a hub of solar panels with battery backups that make facilities like ours resilient, so that when the lights go out, we are able to provide power to the building and provide cooling. The lights never go out, and that's why we call it a community lighthouse.
This is a really great example of how ideas that are generated at the community level are often the most effective and innovative, scalable, and transferable. Hurricane Ida comes along, and so a group of pastors got together and said, okay, look, we've got churches all over New Orleans. What can we do to ensure that the people who need access to power can have access to power even during these long downtimes? It might not seem like a huge deal, 24 hours without power, but if you're someone who depends upon it for a medical device, or you have to keep your medicines cool, or if you live in New Orleans and the heat index is 100, it starts to really matter. These kinds of facilities, like the community lighthouses that started with this very simple idea, have become immeasurable community assets. That's what we have to replicate in rural communities.
It's workable, it's affordable. We recently entered into a formal agreement, an MOU, with our parish government, so that in times of extreme heat, our parish government can contact us and we can then activate.
So often policies are enacted in ways that make no sense on the community level. And so having the communities involved, not only in being a part of that, a co-creator, but actually being the initiator of some of these innovations is absolutely essential in terms of what will work on the ground.
Duke has come and listened with all of their soul at what the needs are of our community and asked us, how can we help you meet your objective?
It's collaboration with local government, a collaboration with the private sector, the building of relationships with people that normally would not be involved in this.
We're looking at health, energy, ag, labor, transportation, and housing. And so once we can quantify what those impacts are, if we can do that by district and by state and by county, then we have a clear signal of what the impacts of heat are for decision makers.
Communities have long identified this problem. They've just been waiting for the rest of us to catch up with them.
So this is what we're working on that I'm so excited about, is creating this network of resilience hubs across the state of North Carolina. And these are situated at churches, at faith-based organizations, at community centers and rural health centers. But, the one thing that's key is that these are places that are open and accessible to everyone. And at full implementation, they are equipped with solar panels and a backup battery to support essential services, things like cooling, charging, lighting, food, water, medical needs. And so as a part of this work, we're going to be working with faith-based organizations to determine their feasibility. And so we call it the Cooling Communities Network. And so if you're a faith-based organization and you want to be a part of the network, you can. There are different tiers to the network. So every church won't be working toward what we call full implementation with the solar panels and the backup batteries. Some churches will just be doing education, and getting access to the resources so that they can do this work in their community, maybe starting small, saying, hey, we want to open as a cooling center this summer. My own church did that last summer. We were like, wow, it's hot. and people may not have access to adequate cooling. Let's open our doors as a cooling center and see what happens. And people showed up, right? People showed up, people came, the county called and said, hey, can we list you all as a cooling center and get this information out to the community? And so truly by opening your doors, we say like, if you make it, they will come. If you open your doors when it's hot out, y'all, people are going to show up. You don't have to wonder if, it really is just a matter of when. And so we talk about full versus limited implementation. So full implementation includes physical upgrading, staffing, funding. Limited implementation is education, asset mapping, vulnerability assessments, and that support that you need to determine, like, is your site ready? But both of these approaches, we believe, will build community resilience and greater heat resilience in communities. And, so there are some comprehensive benefits. There are environmental sensors to support monitoring and response, potential funding for local site liaisons to manage operations, volunteer training focused on heat response and community care, access to educational workshops, and ongoing support. But we do believe that you're the expert in your community again. And so the services that each site provides will be tailored to each site's particular needs. We don't want to assume to know what you need in your community. And so we really do see the role of these organizations that are part of the network as not singular, but part of both a statewide and a local communal network. This is not work that you'll be doing alone. I think it's really important for me to iterate that, but that you'll be doing in partnership with your local government, with local emergency management to meet your community's needs, creating long-term sustainability. It'll include ongoing training for site volunteers and for staff. And it really is about building sustainable relationships so that the work becomes self-sustaining. And, I say no faith organization will do this work alone. And when Jesus sends the disciples out, he sends them in pairs of twos, right? He doesn't say, go do this thing by yourself. Jesus says, no, go and take someone with you, right? So you're going and you're not just taking one person with you, you're doing this work alongside community, partnering with these other organizations. And so we believe that this model will facilitate it'll facilitate coordinating resource allocation, that it'll work on enhanced partnerships so that the responses will be smoother, and it'll also facilitate like clear protocols. I was talking to someone recently about Hurricane Helene, and they said what happened is that they ended up in some communities having, just kind of supplies spread out, and that, the network wasn't as coordinated as it could have been. And so the structure that we're building will make it so that your community will be able to coordinate responses to extreme heat and these extreme weather events in a way that's coordinated, right? So that everyone will understand what their role is, so that when extreme heat happens, when these extreme weather events happen, your community will be prepared to do the work and to move forward. And so, in essence, by leveraging your position as social and informational anchors, churches in North Carolina can help reduce heat-related illnesses and deaths, offering life-saving interventions for their most vulnerable members. And as a church, that's really what we want to be doing. We want to be living out the mandate in Matthew 25, right? What we do unto the least of these. And so thinking about who are the least of these in our community, and how are we ensuring that everyone will be able to withstand extreme heat and will be able to live, right, to see another day, because people are dying. So when is it too hot for humans? This is a quote from the poem It's Hot by Shel Silverstein. He says, "It's hot. I've tried electric fans and pools and ice cream cones. I think I'll take my skin off and sit around in my bones. It's still hot." And so when is it too hot for humans? It's actually very likely too hot well before you feel like it's too hot. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis, for sharing with us a deeper understanding, not only of heat and some of the issues, especially the health concerns and the ways in which it impacts our local communities, but also helping us see that there are some steps that we can take in ways that we can connect. I see in the chat we've got some great questions coming in. I want to invite everyone to continue to put your questions in the chat. When we get to the end of our presentation tonight, we will then open up for Q&A, and we'll start with the questions that you've been sharing with us in the chat. But I want to take a chance or a moment for us to hear from one of our own, from Brian Mateer, who is our conference disaster response coordinator. And you know him as the missions guy here in the Western North Carolina Conference. And I tell you, ever since Hurricane Helene hit, Brian and his team have been on the ground, in the mountains, down in the valleys, finding out what we can do in disaster response. And all at the same time, we realize that there are aspects of Hurricane Helene that were impacted and exacerbated by climate change, by the additional heat that's in the atmosphere, and it has directly impacted our churches and our communities. And we're responding to that, as well as looking at how do we do disaster recovery at a time when we're faced with climate change and know that the impacts are going to continue to come in our direction. So there'll be some information in the chat about Brian Mateer, some bio there. But Brian, I turn it over to you to share with us, what are we doing right here at home in our own conference, and what do you know and are learning as a conference conference disaster response coordinator?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, and thank you, Dr. Lewis, for kind of setting the table. And you know, a lot of what you shared is exciting to me, and a lot of things that we're hearing from churches and in our communities and others doing this work ecumenically and in a nonprofit sphere, specifically related to resilience and how we build our resilience for the future. So I really kind of wanted to get hyper local here and talk about some of the on the ground, what I've noticed and have experienced in my time as disaster response coordinator. I haven't been in that role for too long. I started in 2021 in that role. And prior to that, I was associate director of missional engagement. Now my title is director of missional engagement, which includes disaster response coordinator, and for a while, liaison to our own creation care team and a few other hats. But I specifically wanted to talk about kind of my journey into disaster recovery work and relief work. And it really started back when I was a youth leader. I started, well, I'll back up. I have a undergraduate degree in environmental science from Everett University. My father was a United Methodist minister, so I'm a PK. He was a United Methodist pastor in the Virginia Conference, and a couple of years I did some work around environmental science, working with some agencies that were doing some forestry work, and then found my way into youth ministry and did that for a while, and then eventually the last about 12 years I've been doing mission work. So I've always had this interest in how the church shows up in the environmental justice space. So after I became missions director, I was exposed to long-term recovery efforts after Hurricane Helene. Specifically, I was in the Biloxi area where, I'm sorry, not Helene, Hurricane Katrina. So we were working on some houses in eastern Biloxi that was hit very hard by tornadoes. And I saw the devastation firsthand. And, that's a coastal storm, kind of expected. The devastation was surprising, but we have hurricanes in the southeast. And then in 2021, when I was started working at the conference, Tropical Storm Fred hit Haywood County, and what happened with that event was there was a landslide that blocked the Pigeon River in the Crusoe Valley. it pulled the water, and then there was a rush of water. So just an extreme rain event. And then obviously we've been dealing with Hurricane Helene more recently, and the impacts of Hurricane Helene, a storm that was, as the outer bands reached our region, it had not made complete landfall in the southeast. So we're having these larger storms, and um, I wanted to mention that the Appalachian area, in particular our area, has been significantly in the past a place for climate migration. So folks that are impacted by coastal storms, they come to this area, they come to Appalachia because it's safe, because it's cooler, so the impacts of extreme heat are lessened. But the reality is there is no place safe anymore. We're having unprecedented storms even in our region. Um, so getting kind of back to this hyper local area, I wanted to highlight the community of Pensacola. I didn't know about Pensacola until right after the storm. It's in an area in Avery County, and it is in a holler. Y'all know what a holler is? A holler is a valley that is usually one way in and one way out, or it's kind of a community of itself, sometimes cut off from other communities, and is a place where people gather and stay and live, and sometimes for generations. Um, so this picture here in this first slide is of Pensacola United Methodist Church. It is right along the Cattail Creek. And that particular creek did exactly like what happened after Hurricane or Tropical Storm Fred. There was a landslide, and it blocked the water, and then there was a rush of water. I talked with a survivor just a few days after the storm, and they talked about this wall of water rushing down. And the creek itself is, I mean, you could jump across it in some areas. So just think about the destruction and what that might have been like. So Pensacola United Methodist Church was right along Cattail Creek, and there was a large tree, and it was probably an 8-foot root ball that had been pulled out of the ground that ran right through the sanctuary. There was a giant hole in the sanctuary. So we think about Pensacola as this place that represents a lot of Western North Carolina communities, and a lot of the communities where we have been working and with. And one of the things that Dr. Lewis said that played out exactly how she meant or mentioned it was that the church was trusted when others weren't. So we would show up in our green disaster ministry shirts, and we were trusted, and sometimes not even other agencies, government agencies were trusted, but we were. So it certainly made us remember that responsibility and how the impact that the church can make in community. So there's some social and economic vulnerabilities in this community. We found out in Pensacola, as in many other places, that there's limited emergency resources, aging infrastructure, and this just created real challenges in the recovery work. So not only is the Cattail Creek right in Pensacola, but it also joins with the Cane River. And like I was mentioning, there was basically one way in and one way out. And along the Cane River, there was at least 6 landslides that took out the road going back to Pensacola. So just getting back there was an incredible challenge. The long-term kind of community risk are the geological structure continues to change. It took a while for the land to settle. So folks are now trying to figure out how to live with the reality of a changing water system. So this is one of the bridges that were taken out. You can notice that that kind of land bridge that was created to access I don't know if you can see the house in kind of that top corner, but that's one of our clients that we worked on her home, not because of the water from the creek, but from the water from the mountains. And that's something that was unexpected and um, kind of unprecedented, that many of the homes that we're working on right now, um, flooding came down from the mountain. So it was runoff water. Um, so you can see that some of the challenges were structural damage, altered terrain, and almost all the clients that we work with, they are underinsured or uninsured, particularly related to flood insurance, because many people are outside of the 100-year floodplain. They are now remapping a lot of those floodplains in the areas that have, significantly changed at this point. And then obviously there's just disrupted infrastructure, as you can note in the picture. Here's one of the landslides that I was mentioning from the ride back into Pensacola. Um, if you're in Western North Carolina, you'll see these scars in the mountainside all over. So our landscape has fundamentally changed. Um, the river systems have sediment. It's created new gullies with, clogged drainage, damaged land. Um, there were over 1,000 private bridges that were washed out from Hurricane Helene. So that's been a real challenge in the recovery efforts. Oftentimes, a bridge is the only thing standing in between a homeowner and their recovery. So that's been a huge project of our state. And a lot of nonprofits are working in that space as well. And then the environmental impact of this storm, um, reduces land productivity and increases vulnerability to folks. Um, so these are all some of the challenges that we're dealing with in our Western North Carolina neighbors are dealing with. Here's some additional kind of ecological and hydrological disruptions that Hurricane Helene caused. Again, the widening of the creeks causing bank erosion and large sediment displacement and deposit, loss of vegetation. In fact, Jonathan's taken a team of folks next week to Boone, North Carolina, to do some stream bank stabilization and planting of live stakes for one of our clients that had to create a new berm after her creek was flooded and changed the topography of her front yard. Um, Certainly, our water quality is degraded, and our water systems are fragile even now. We have some places that are, you know, um, on temporary water systems that are frail and fragile. Um, and then obviously, you'll note in that last picture of the landslide, that there's a lot of tree damage. So lots and lots of trees down in Western North Carolina, creating problems in the streams that can cause potential future flooding, but also the impact and risk of wildfires. And then there's just some kind of long-term recovery challenges and environmental justice issues that have been raised in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. Rural underserved communities face higher risk and barriers to disaster aid. So this is prolonging recovery, and they're exposed to hazards. We're still getting new clients every day, folks that we're just learning of, and folks that are just now coming to us and needing help. Vulnerable communities face disproportionate harm during disasters, experiencing heightened health risk, repeated displacement, and deeper long-term inequities due to limited resources and greater exposure to climate hazards. The impacts of environmental racism, so systemic policies and decisions that concentrate environmental hazards in marginalized communities, causes Black and brown communities to suffer disproportionate harm, and including greater health risk and reduced protection when disasters occur. And then finally, the need for equitable recovery. So future resilience requires environmental restoration, equitable support, improved risk mapping, and tailored policy. So this particular picture um, is a mobile home community in the Spruce Pine area where we have one of our regional recovery teams, and these folks are at risk. Their mobile home park was flooded. Their mobile homes were turned over, and for a while they just turned them back over and were living in very unsafe conditions. And there's a lot of fear within communities of immigrant communities based on the current policies that are occurring around immigration and immigration enforcement. So yeah, that we continue the work of long-term recovery into the future. We're about a year and a half in, and we anticipate that we'll be at it for another at least 3 years. Our regional teams are in 3 locations in the one I mentioned in Avery, Mitchell, and Yancey County out of Spruce Pine United Methodist. We also have an operations center in what we call the High Country region, which is serving Ashe and Watauga counties. And then our third region is out of Reeves Chapel United Methodist Church in Asheville, serving Buncombe and surrounding counties. So we are filling teams for this summer. We just have a few weeks between now and May open. June is pretty much filled up. So I invite you to encourage your churches to consider bringing a team up and doing some long-term recovery work with us. But I'd also encourage you to consider your own personal preparedness as well as your church preparedness and how you would support your communities in the event of a future disaster. So this is a conversation that's taking place and is on everyone's mind since Hurricane Helene. The conference office and the disaster ministries teams are here to support churches with local church disaster plans, as well as strategizing about resilience hubs and resourcing through trainings and possible grant opportunities as well. So I invite you to connect with me if you have some interest in the long-term recovery, as well as some of the resilience hub opportunities that we're trying to work with. So thank you for your time, and I know I'm standing between you and the ACC tournament, so we'll be happy to answer some questions and wrap up the evening.
So before we get into the questions, I want to thank Michelle and Brian for your presentations and sharing with us some of the impacts and effects, and then ways in which we as the church can respond in a time of climate change. Climate change has been called a threat multiplier. So all of the things that are happening, from migration to food insecurity to housing issues to job security, all of that is greater impacted by climate change and will continue to be so into the future. And so as the people of faith, we are so often called to care for our communities. And one of the things we want to do in making that happen is to help us as a people in your own local communities develop the ability to be there, to partner with those around you, and to be a source of care for those in that space. And so, as we're mentioning, on April 18th at the Bishop's Climate Summit, we will be offering a number of workshops, and Dr. Michelle Lewis is going to be sharing and presenting a workshop on church as a heat resiliency hub. And Brian will be presenting a workshop on disaster, climate, and mission, preparing the church for what's next. And these are going to be ways in which you can learn as a congregation how to care for and understand what's going on with your community. And so I encourage you, I'm not sure what my slides are doing here. They're looking kind of weird on my screen, but I want to encourage you to click on the link that we'll put here in the chat for the event itself on April 18th, and bring some people from your church with you. This is a great opportunity for pastors, for lay leaders, for Sunday school teachers, trustees, youth leaders, lots of different folks who are in a position where we might take this ministry and develop it for us as the church into the future. And so we want to invite you to bring 5 or more people, get a discount, and invite students and those to come as well, and come and be a part of that event on Saturday, April 18th in Winston-Salem. Finally, I just want to thank you for joining us today. I want to thank those who made these webinars possible. We just want to reach out and thank Kim Richmond, who's on here with us. She is our Conference Creation Care Team layperson who leads alongside me in that role. Dawn Lewis is behind the scenes, running some of our technology and making things work there. You already heard from Brian Mateer, and he is on our team and is a liaison between the team and the conference staff. And I just want to thank all the other members of your Conference Creation Care Team. We've had conversations and discussions and trying to figure out how best to help you and resource you, not just through these webinars, but through the Bishop's Climate Summit and beyond. So there are going to be more and more opportunities for you to develop your green team, to become a resiliency hub, to partner with people in the community. And all of this is possible because our Bishop, Ken Carter, supports this ministry and really believes in what our churches can do and become in the face of the world in which we're dealing with. And so if you want to reach out to us, the email address is there on your screen, creationcarewncc@gmail.com. And we can share with you the different resources and ways in which your annual conference can partner with you in your local church to do some of this creation care ministry. So let me stop my screen there, and let's take some time to talk about some of the questions that you've got here for our presenters tonight. We've had a number of questions here that have come in on the chat, and so I just want to kind of go back and share some of those with us and to see if our presenters might be able to help answer some of these questions. So one of the questions, I think this one was toward Michelle, was asking, like, when we develop a church as a cooling center, is there, in your development and preparation for cooling centers, kind of when do they usually open? Is it based on the heat index? Is it based on just the months of the year? Is it, does it depend on each individual site? Kind of what are parameters that you encourage us to consider when we want to open up a cooling site?
So, Jonathan, in a perfect world, your cooling center would be open all summer, right? From the time it starts to get hot until it's not hot. But that's a perfect world, right? Perfect world, best case scenarios. I can tell you what we did at the church that I serve, just kind of like a practical. We were like, okay, when is there heat index? When is there like an extreme heat day, right? But, like when is there a heat advisory? And so we were open all heat advisory days are the days that we were open because that's what we could manage as a small church just starting out to see how it worked, right? And so, but I mean, ideally, if the temperatures hit, and I see Ashley Ward is on. She's the director of the Heat Policy Innovation Hub. But ideally, if the temperatures are going to hit roughly like upper 80s and above, like that's when you would want to be open in a perfect scenario. But some of this is going to be site dependent. You might be like, whoa, we don't know if we can do that. And you might decide to just, well, let's try it on like heat advisory days, right? And you let your like local government and your social service office know, like, we're going to be open if there's, because if there's going to be a heat advisory, you usually know ahead of time when the heat wave is coming. So, so that would be my recommendation just from that. And Ashley did drop a link in the chat for the North Carolina Heat Alert System. For anyone that wants to join, it's free and it's based on health outcomes. So that link is there. Thank you, Ashley, for putting that in the chat. Is it okay if I just kind of work through these questions, work my way through the questions that were asked?
I can share something with you that may help on the question from Thelma. Thelma is a member of one of our African American churches in Charlotte. So she's in the kind of the urban center part of the city, and they're working on looking into solar panels. And so she's just asking, with your program, would her church kind of qualify for getting the battery backup put in place and things like that? And I don't know, some of our churches are going to ask, do we need to be on the Duke Endowment rural church list
Right.
or things for some of what you're offering?
So any faith-based organization can be a part of the network. And what that means is we'll make education available to you. You'll have the resources so that you can, and we're still developing these resources, but we feel really good about them. The resources that we're developing is a roadmap for churches that want to do this work. And so we want to like kind of walk alongside you and help you have what you need so as you're thinking about this work. And we're starting with 5 to 6 sites that will go toward full implementation. And this work is funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. They've asked us to select 5 to 6 sites. We hope that these 5 to 6 sites will go toward full implementation, but we're really hopeful that long-term work will include a site in every county, at least one site in every county. But everybody can be a part of the network. So everyone will have access to the education and the training, right? And even, some ideas for funding, because you might say, well, how do we fund this work? I saw that as one of the questions. Your local community foundation can be a really good place to start. Local community foundations really like to fund this type of work. If you go to your local community foundation, if you look at the grants are open, talk to one of the grant officers that are there, and they'll tell you what they're looking for in grant applications. And if you say, hey, this is what we're excited about, this is the teaching and the education and the training that we're doing, they may say, you know what, we can kick in X amount of dollars toward this project. Here's the application. And there may be others in your community. There may just be like local people who want to help like fund this work as well. So I want to encourage you to think broadly. For some of our sites, there will, and we're also working on a funding mechanism, but all the pieces haven't been worked out for that at this time because we really don't want this to be a burden on faith communities, right? Because so many faith communities are already just trying to figure out how to keep the lights on, right? And recognize that as a reality. But we also have some educational resources that are, and I think I shared this probably with you before, Jonathan, that we have some educational resources. We had a group of students who worked with us when we were first starting this project who developed book studies and Bible studies and liturgies that you can use in worship and with your churches to help you in teaching about extreme heat and climate and weather events. And so soon we'll have a sign up on our website. So, and when we have that ready, Jonathan, we'll send it to you so that churches that are interested in being a part of the network and that are interested in more information can just put that in. And we won't send out a ton of emails, but we'll make sure that you have the information that you need so that you can be a part of the work.
I would add that our churches are really equipped for this work. Many of our churches already do some sort of feeding initiative of some kind, a community meal or a food pantry giveaway or something like that. So I think there's some pretty simple things that you can do that can provide space for folks during times of extreme heat. That you've already built trust. People are already coming to your facility. So what are a few things that you can put in place to welcome your neighbor during those times, or allow them to stay a little further in those really hot times?
Yeah, and there's a really great question here. Thank you so much for adding that, Brian. There's a really great question here about how do you reach people who are alone, who might not have anyone to let them know about the work. And that's why these partnerships are so important, right? Because there may be people in your church that are alone, right? Where the only time they see or engage with people is on Sunday. But social services is often a really good avenue to find where those people are that are alone. You can also connect with the people who deliver Meals on Wheels in your community. Those are great resources. They're delivering often to people who are alone. And so you could make up a card and ask Meals on Wheels to take that card out and drop it it off with people, I'm sure they'd be happy to do that so that those people who are the most vulnerable and most alone in your community get that information. You could also go just old school phone chain, right? Everybody call a person, everybody call 2 or 3 people, call people who are not just part of your church, right? People who are out in the community and ask them to call 1 or 2 people as well, so that the word gets out. And if everybody calls, if you start with 20 people and everybody calls 1 or 2 people and asks them to move the message along as well, you'd be surprised at the number of people that you can reach. Um,
There's a question on here that Kim Richmond asked about ecological restoration as possibilities for mission trips. So one of the things that we're developing, and I'll have a workshop at the Bishops Climate Summit on this as well, is what we're calling eco missions. And we're developing new mission opportunities for everyone from mixed age groups to youth groups to campus ministries to all adult teams to come and do environmentally, ecologically focused work. Whereas in the past, we've always thought of disaster response or mission work, going and working on houses, doing roofing work, painting walls, fixing stairs and things like that. But we're looking at how do we expand the concept out to all of the life of God's creation in the community. And so those ecological restoration type trips could involve anything having to do with runoff. Brian was talking about these houses in the mountains, that the water running down off of the mountain really cause problems with the houses. Maybe there's ways for us to help build up areas around up above the house so it diverts the water from coming through the house. That's a possibility. Brian mentioned the planting of trees and root systems into a berm that's created as an elevated bank to keep the water from rushing right back into the house next time there's a flood. Those are some possibilities. One of the things in the mountains is that somewhere around 30% of all the trees came down during Hurricane Helene, which means there's a lot of dead wood lying around in places. And with it being as dry as it has been in North Carolina, we're concerned about fire hazards. And so we may be looking at doing some work with that. There could be possibilities for invasive species removal. When all those trees come down, more sunlight gets down to the ground and invasive species kind of take over. And that can be a problem with the landscape as well. Brian, I saw you take your mic off. If you want to add a couple of ideas, what are other ecological focused projects we might do?
Yeah, I think you've kind of keyed in on the ones that I was thinking about. I was coming off mute because I wanted to offer a resource of our disaster ministries team, and that is we have a local church disaster preparedness plan template that is fillable, that we can provide any church, and I encourage all of your churches to do that. And some of the resources, I put my email in the chat, but some of the resources along with this local church disaster plan also talks about personal preparedness and then how to connect with vulnerable people in your communities and congregation to help build that resilience. Again, if you don't know if you have a church disaster plan, talk to your pastor, talk to your church trustee, because we can respond and we can go really deep in resilience and response, but there's also a lot of things that we can do just to better prepare us for future events that we might have.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so reach out to us and we can get that information to you to help your church as you begin working toward becoming a place of resilience and caring for your community. There's a question on here about heat can become a sudden crisis for a lot of people, especially if the power fails, which is something that we've seen again and again in places where that happens. We know that our power supply system is kind of fragile when heat or extreme weather comes through. And in that case, we are looking at how do you become cooling centers. So how do you prepare for that suddenness? There are a couple of ways to do that. One of the ways is that some of our churches that are installing solar power are looking beyond just generating the power, but putting in battery backup systems so that if the power goes down, they're ready for that. Just give you a case in point. I was looking to see if Joe's still on here, but he's not. Joe, one of our team members is at Hendersonville United Methodist Church, and they put the largest solar array on a church in North Carolina. It was installed, I believe, it was hooked up and started in February of 2024. And when Hurricane Helene came through the mountains in September, the power grid was down for over a week, almost 2 weeks there. And the church did not have a battery backup system. They were directly plugged into the main grid. And so they were positioned and ready to offer electric power backup as cooling or whatever that needed to be done, refrigeration for medications and things like that. But they didn't have a battery backup system in place in order to keep that running. And so they realized that that's their next step, is to prepare themselves for things like heat that could bring down the grid and other issues like that. But I'm going to toss this one over to Michelle because this sounds like something that you probably have some expertise on.
Yeah, and Jonathan, I'm so glad that you told that story because you're exactly right. Like solar panels without the battery backup, when the grid goes down, then you're still down, just like everyone else is, right? And so that's one of the reasons as we're working with, and so we're looking at about $1.5 million worth of investment in the communities that work with us toward full implementation. Because we realize it's not enough to have just the solar panels, but also the battery backup. But that's why planning starts now, right? And there are portable like solar batteries too, right? And so I know like something that I have with my organization. I run a small nonprofit called the Peace Garden Project. We actually have a big old battery that you can power with solar panels, right? You can also charge it from a cord. And so like those things exist. So even if you're like, okay, we can go small, but it's enough of a charge to like keep a refrigerator running, right? And so thinking about what are the things that you can do short term, because even with the faith-based organizations that we're working with toward full implementation, that's going to take some time, right? So what are the short-term things that you can do and you decide what's the greatest need in your community, right? The greatest need might be, oh, okay, well, we know we're going to need a place where medical supplies and where like people's medications can be stored in the event of like extreme weather event, extreme power outage, right? Widespread power outage. Okay, what do we need to make sure like these three things are powered up, even if we're without power, right? What are there, is there like an outdoor temporary shelter that we can put up, right? So thinking that way. Um, and the director of the heat hub, she always says, planning for extreme heat should take place all year, right? And so I'm really glad that you all are online now when it's super cold out. In many of our communities here in North Carolina, right? Yesterday was beautiful though, right? And today it's like, what happened? So that you're thinking about that now. I also put a link to some heat safety resources in the chat box. And these are things that you can do that are like low budget, right? Things like setting up an ice bath outside that you like can immerse your arms in. Because immersing your arms up to your elbows in cold water, it actually brings your body temperature down really fast for people who are experiencing like extreme heat and heat illness, right? Sticking your feet in ice cold water. You might not want your feet in there with a bunch of other people's feet, right? But because most of the time people make it through the storm, right? It's the period after the storm when there are these extended power outages, when people suffer and when people die. And so I put that there along with some information about cooling communities, the project, so you can learn more about that.
Great. Thanks, Michelle.
Mhm.
So do other folks have questions that you haven't put in the chat, but you just like to share with your microphone? If you would, you can raise your hand or come off mute and ask a question for our team or our presenters for tonight.
So just a comment. I know you've heard a lot of things, and your church may not be ready to put solar on your building. Maybe it is. Hopefully, it is. But what are maybe one or two steps you can take towards being more prepared in your church and for your community? What are one or two steps that you can do to be a welcoming place as a cooling center? So, I think sometimes we think we got to do it all, but or here's another thing. What are communities, what are other organizations or churches doing in your community that you can connect with and partner with? So, you don't have to take these giant leaps. Um, just
That's right.
step forward.
Brian, can I say like two easy things you can do is like turn down the AC and buy some popsicles because everybody loves a popsicle on a hot day. And now if you say like we're having popsicle Saturday, it's gonna be hot, come by and get your popsicle, right? People may not come and show up to a cooling center, but y'all, people are gonna come get those popsicles.
Mhm.
Oh, Jason, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, you mentioned that y'all made a run at this just to see what happens as a cooling center last summer, just to kind of see what happens. So what happened? Like, what was the good and bad and ugly that you found?
You know what? There was no ugly.
Good.
The bad was who's going to staff it, right? And that came up, like, wait, who's going to be in the church while it's open? But the amazing thing was people showed up. We even had like we didn't even realize people were doing work in the community, but they were groups of young people who had been in the community doing, like working on houses. And they found out we were a cooling center. We got a call like, hey, we've got this group of kids and we're gonna bring over these kids, and is it okay if we have lunch in your we're like, that's what we're here for, that's why we're open, right? And so word got out, social services called and was like, can we list y'all down as like a formal cooling site, right? And so yeah, people showed up. There were days when no one showed up, right, as we were just getting started, but as we're got out. Yeah, people showed up, and then the question was, okay, how do we keep this going? And partnerships is how you keep it going, right? Because if you're a small church and you're only a handful of people, that's going to be the thing, right? But if you can partner with one or two other organizations, right, and get some more folks in there, then you're not just relying on, in quotes, your people, right, to
Right.
keep it open. So. Mhm.
Yeah, I could see you pairing up with a couple other churches, like a church that wasn't willing or didn't have the capacity to open up, but had the people.
Exactly, right? Like,
We're more than happy to work at your church.
right, yeah, we'll work at your church, but we don't want to mess up the carpet over here.
Right.
Yeah. Mhm.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you. Great question.
Does anyone else have any questions for us tonight? Well, let me just thank you again for being here for this third webinar of our series. As we stated earlier, you can find all of these three recordings. Well, the third one will be on there very soon, but all three are on the conference website in the Creation Care Ministry section on our webinars for the pre-Bishops Summit, Bishops Climate Summit webinars. You can go to the main page for the Bishops Climate Summit and access the webinars from there as well. Learn about the workshops that we're going to be offering at the summit. You can register for the summit and you can share that information with others also. And Michelle, did you raise your hand again?
Yeah, last thing,
Yes.
and what I do next month is going to be different from tonight. So if you're like, I already heard that, it's not going to be the same thing. That's all.
I'm glad you said that. Yes, because that could help people pique their interest here to come and hear even more as well. But we would love for you to bring a team from your church, split up and go to different workshops, and then pull the information back together with you. And at the summit, we plan to announce some follow-up opportunities for you, from book studies to groups of churches working together and learning how to work in their own community with one another, to possible speakers coming to town, things that we're working on lining up that could be useful for you. So come on out and be with us on April 18th, and we'll continue to resource you as we go forward. We've got your email address, so we're adding your name and email to our regular email list that we don't inundate you, but we like to keep you informed with what's happening in Creation Care Ministries through the Western North Carolina Conference. And at any time, if that's too much for you, let us know. We're very easy on working with you. But thank you for your interest, and we will continue to serve you and your churches through the work of the Conference Creation Care Ministry. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.